Hello YouTube. We are in a Walmart parking lot on a hot July day. The windows are down. A little breeze is coming in, trying to evade the sun, but it's high noon, so it's kind of right directly on us. Today I wanted to talk about a fiery book, a book that's pertinent that I've been reading. I've been meaning to read it for some time, and I finally got to reading it. It is War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning by Hedges. This is a book that was written in the wake of 9/11. I think it was published 2002. I might be wrong. Interestingly, I got this from the library. Once again, it's one of those library books. Go get books from the library if you don't want to buy a whole bunch of books. I do have a problem with that, though, buying books. I ended up buying 2 books today anyway, so I didn't really... I don't really hold that end of the bargain completely faithfully, let's just say. But this book was signed by the author. Whoa, isn't that cool? See that signature there? Signature right there. Isn't that cool? Signed by the author. He probably signed like thousands of them and sent them to the libraries. But War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. It was a finalist in the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction. I think finalist for Pulitzer Prize as well. Or he was a member of the New York Times team that won the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for reporting on global terrorism. However, he is far from he's not a neocon at all. Yes, this is this is 2002. This book was published. Who is Hedges? Hedges is a journalist. He was a war correspondent. He documented wars in Central America, El Salvador, I think, and Nicaragua. Other places in the world like Sudan, all over the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, the Balkans. He extensively talks about the Balkans in this book. And the title, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, is a very provocative sounding title. Actually, before we get into the title of the book, Hedges, he's a war correspondent, but although this book comes in the wake of 9/11, he is far from a neocon as far as how he approaches this stuff. Sick music, guys. He definitely is not a neocon, but he is, unfortunately, he would admit it himself. He is a part of this sort of industrial complex, just in how he is reporting on war, how he is complicit on it, how he is talking about war, and he would admit it himself. I'm not sure if he does pretty much admit it in this book. And this is why he had breakdowns, I think he talks about how he got in a fight and like beat up one of the a concierge or someone who was an airline official or something like that, because he couldn't get his ticket. He had some issues with his ticket or something like that, and he just snapped and beat up this concierge. I might be wrong about this, but there was not concierge. Sorry. Whoa, the heat is melting my brains. I feel like Don Quixote in that one line. Whatever. Oh my goodness, what's wrong with my head? Whatever, the airline official. And how war has this effect on us. It has this drug-like appeal to those who are involved with it, to those who are truly in the war zones. Whereas people who are not in the war zones, people who are more fortunate, are given a myth as it relates to war. 'A myth of nationalism, a myth of just war, Whereas Hedges tries to paint war as something that is a force in itself. It is a sort of self-perpetuating spirit that doesn't care about right or wrong. All war cares about is propagating more war. Essentially, it can almost be thought of as a return to the Greek spirits and gods, who themselves just existed to perpetuate their own essence in the world. The Greeks are mentioned all the time throughout this book. There are many references to other philosophers, other thinkers, other people that he was corresponding with. Modern history is delved into quite deeply, especially the Balkans. If you would like to get a good snapshot of the Balkans, if you don't know too much about the Balkans and the breakup of Yugoslavia, which I didn't know too much about, this book will give you quite a lot of insights in regards to that, but it's not focusing primarily on the Balkans. He also goes into El Salvador and Iraq and these other places like I mentioned. The book is 7 chapters. Each chapter reads like an essay on its own, describing war and its relationship to other things. So the first one is the myth of war. The second one is the plague of nationalism. Then the destruction of culture, the seduction of battle and the perversion of war. The hijacking and recovery of memory, the cause, and Eros and Thanatos. Eros and Thanatos being the two drives, Freudian death drives from Greek mythology. Eros being love, Thanatos being death. So this is quite a pertinent book now with everything that's happening in the world. But as always, war is always happening in the world. So it probably has been a pertinent book for some time. But in the public consciousness, I think discussions of war and what it means to truly engage in war rather than believe in this myth of war that we have been fed in our ivory towers, we can say. We haven't had to engage with any war. If you're at least in the West, we can say, if you are someone who is from North America, unless you are a veteran or someone who has actually been into these combat zones, very few people in the West or in many places of the world have not experienced true war. There are many people who have experienced true war who are just civilians. Who get turned into upstart soldiers, warlords, people who are defending their country. They get all taken into this sort of whirlpool of war. And very often this whirlpool is self-perpetuating. You start war, you keep going at it. And even the people that are exalted as heroes, the veterans, many of them struggle to come to terms with the atrocities that they committed. And there is a huge conflict in their minds as to whether they truly should be revered as heroes. The book mentions a Vietnam War veteran that led an ambush that killed, I think it's nearly 10 or a dozen civilians. Just shot them down in their huts. And this veteran this information didn't leak out until he got older, and he was commemorated, but he himself, it's not that he's a villainous person himself, he himself was struggling to accept the fact that he was revered as a hero. So war is pernicious. It's pervasive. It also creates cultural barriers as far as language. This was one of the most interesting parts of the Balkans when he mentions how the language of the Balkans, they essentially all spoke the same language. The Croats, Serbs, and the Bosnians, those three, they essentially spoke a form of Serbian, we can say, with different dialects. However, after World War II, and especially during the Yugoslav wars, these dialects, if you were speaking Croat, which is, the Croatians are the predominantly Catholic group of people from the Balkans, the Serbians are the Orthodox, and the Bosniaks are predominantly Muslim. If you spoke one of those dialects, if they could tell that you were using, certain words, for example, the Bosniaks use a few Arabic phrases, inshallah, all of that, God willing, all of that, slight little variations. It was a real problem if you were using the wrong language in the wrong territory, we can say. We're not even going to call it country at this point. So if you were in a Serbian occupied territory and you were using Bosnian language, it was a real issue. But not only that, the language divides grew and grew because of that. Because of that, it became clear that Bosnians were the only ones that were supposed to use inshallah, let's say, for example. Whereas there were many Serbians, there were many Orthodox Christians, even Croats, who used some of these expressions. They were living in predominantly Muslim territories, but they still were Christian, they still were Orthodox or Catholic, but just because they used some of these expressions, that doesn't mean that they necessarily were Bosnians, or it goes around the other way as well for Croats or Serbians using their own type of language. So these language became used as a tool to divide people, and that was an interesting section for me, because I didn't know that. I didn't know that these languages were really that similar. Perhaps I am wrong, perhaps Hedges was wrong, but I think it seems like I would have to trust him as a journalist who extensively covered these areas. But I haven't spoken about this with any Serbian, Croats, or Bosnians. I don't know, is it Bosnians or Bosniaks? I don't know. I haven't spoken to this as it relates to this to any of those people. I don't, in fact, know many people who are Serbian, Croatian, or Bosnian heritage. Although there are many refugees, or people who are second generation from those areas. And these wars especially, they really pit people against each other, especially in the Balkans. But there still are people, especially as he describes the Balkans extensively, I should say. It's not that this is particular to the Balkans, but there is just such a mesh of different cultures, faiths, beliefs there that it's just so ripe to create differences and to perpetuate these differences and use them as a reason to engage in warfare. And the crimes that happen in war, they only augment. It's always a who can one up the other one. Oh, they did this. It's only logical that we respond by this. And then, oh yeah, they did that, so we have to respond by that. It's a never-ending cycle. And pertinent, as always. Very somber book at times. He does end on a light note as it relates to eros, love being something that is itself eternal. I will read the last passage. To survive as a human being is possible only through love, and when Thanatos is ascendant, the instinct must be to reach out to those we love, to see in them all the divinity, pity, and pathos of the human, and to recognize love in the lives of others, even those with whom we are in conflict. Love that is like our own. It does not mean we will avoid war or death. It does not mean that we, as distinct individuals, will survive. But love in its mystery has its own power. It alone gives us meaning that endures. It allows us to embrace and cherish life. Love has power both to resist in our nature what we know we must resist, and to affirm what we know we must affirm. And love, as the poets remind us, is eternal. So that is it. War is a force that gives us meaning. A provocative title, but not a title that at all endorses war. A book, I should say, that aims to view war as a sort of spiritual force that causes a whirlwind of destruction, strife, that we yet must understand. We must understand the language of war, how it speaks to nationalism, difference, short of destruction of memory as well. And that's it. That's the video on War as a Force that gives us meaning. A bit of a chaotic video, but I hope that you found some value in this. Otherwise, take care. See ya.